Hello and welcome to News in Depth here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. European security officials are warning of an increase in Russia-linked hybrid warfare activity and calling for tougher, more visible deterrence measures. But beyond policy, how are countries on the front line actually preparing for that kind of pressure? Joining us today on News in Depth is our defense correspondent, Zuzanna Jurek, who has been in Estonia, a country that has long viewed Russia as a direct threat, looking at how society and the military are responding. Hello and welcome to News in Depth.
Thanks for having me on.
So you're actually in Estonia, and can you help us understand what kind of sense of threat actually look like on the ground there?
Well, so it's very clear from when you are on the ground in Estonia, particularly when it comes to northern and eastern parts of the country, that the population there is acutely aware of potential confrontations that they might have with the Russian forces, particularly that the geography doesn't necessarily, make that feeling any easier to deal with. Russia is just around the corner. It's literally a frontline state. So on the ground, it's very much so the prevalence of a feeling that you have to be prepared for when the war with Russia comes, not if it comes.
Right, it does sound very intense over there. And of course, you brought back a reportage from there. Let's take a look at your report.
It's a place where the memory of Soviet imperialism is always just under the surface, and where post-communist independence is deeply celebrated. A place of fragmented languages and fragmented identities. Estonia, a NATO and EU member which sits atop the Baltics, shares a 300-kilometer land border with Russia. Nearly 30% of its population lists Russian as their mother tongue, a country where the awareness of a looming, if not imminent, war seeps into the everyday. But in the country, nowhere is this feeling more palpable than in the eastern border city of Narva.
A place where the past meets modernity and the east meets the west. Behind me you can see Russia as it glares towards Europe, separating the two countries, a shallow river and a bridge known historically as the Bridge of Friendship. Since 2022, however, this very piece of infrastructure has become a place in a fight against hybrid warfare with Russia, namely the weaponization of migrants, and shown what else needs to be done in order to bolster EU's external security.
The city of around 54,000 is closer to St. Petersburg than Estonia's capital Tallinn. 95% of Narva's aging residents speak only Russian. It knows a thing or two about tensions, from clashes over the removal of Soviet-era statues to conflict over educational reforms that saw Estonian enshrined as the sole official language. Since 2022, overt adversarial acts have run rampant, including the now infamous Buyi Gate, where Russian border guards tried to shift the border on the river separating the two nations.
The war feels very, very close, and this makes the situation different than it is elsewhere. Yes, people are afraid of war. It's not talked about much, but still, it's believed that NATO will also protect us, and people have chosen Estonia as their home. They really like it here, but the situation is truly tense. Temperatures are running high.
And just like other countries on NATO's eastern flank, Estonia's borders have been subject to hybrid warfare.
We saw very interesting FSB officer action, which meant that they were pooling, for example, migrants in hangars, and they pulled them in groups. And basically we saw that FSB officers started filming our reaction.
Estonia responded by putting up fortifications.
Well, we are actually focused on a drone wall project as well. So our mission is to see the low altitude flying objects that are crossing the border or trying to cross the border and hamper their movement. And first of all detect and then do something about it. So this is where we are focused solely at the moment. This project is ongoing and will be finished quite soon.
But warfare isn't just physical, as the battle for hearts and minds of Russian speakers continues.
Russians celebrate Victory Day on 9th of May, as we celebrate Europeans Day. And what we've seen is that just over the river, they have built a large stage with screens, etc. They are saying that they celebrate Victory Day in Ivangorod, but all the screens are pointed towards Estonia. All the screens are pointing towards Narva.
The enemy threat doesn't just come from the outside. The fragmentation of national identities and the ethnic makeup of the border areas lends itself to fifth column activities. A number of Russian-speaking Estonians have been accused of collaborating with Moscow's security services.
No, Narva on 98%.
It's a very unique situation. We can't just ask what connects Estonia. Everyone is trying to figure out what Estonia is. Is it European or is it Russian? People shouldn't be forced to choose one or the other constantly, but I don't think everyone sees it the same way. We have to realize that people must eventually make a choice.
But the country's precarious geographical location, its social and ethnic makeup, and its anti-Soviet identity all embedded an understanding of both personal and collective responsibility in every Estonian, a notion held by the conscription-based army, a model that's crucial to the survival of a country as small as Estonia.
The motivation of conscripts by themselves has risen to such level that it is much easier to do more intensive training. We train all our young men and some of our young women from basically having zero military experience to then up to being able to fulfill their tasks within companies and battalions. So for us, yes, the training effort is mostly on conscript, but also on reserve call-ups, because the reserve units also need constant training and constant refreshment. So our whole idea of our defense being a very small country is that we need a situation where most of our people are capable of fulfilling also their wartime tasks.
This is how Estonia is preparing for a potential war with Russia. The newly selected conscripts of the Estonian Defense Forces are undertaking training, military drills and exercises, both defensive and offensive, all in order to boost their preparedness for potential clashes with adversaries from the east.
And as we saw at the training grounds in eastern Estonia, conscripts are taught to face a flurry of challenges, practicing both offensive and defensive tactics. Ukraine's battlefield experience plays a major role in the conscripts training program.
Battlefield is transparent. The old things and the methods still work, so we focus on close fight in build-up area.
As these young people say, though preparedness builds resilience, it doesn't immunize a person against the simplest of human emotions, fear.
Before, I kind of had the anxiety that what if war happened? What will I do? I wouldn't say I'm more scared, but at least I'm more aware of the possibilities.
I've been a little bit nervous, but since my family is also in the military, let's just say I sleep well knowing who defend our country.
And part of strengthening Estonia's military resilience comes from the bottom up, the appropriately named Estonian Defense League.
We have 15 counties and 15 units. So we can say we are everywhere any time. And we are not running to protect the border if something happens. But we work closely together with other organizations, especially with the Estonian Army and our allies from NATO. And anybody has their own task, and every unit has their own task.
And as Major Niemi pointed out, there is a visible correlation between the perception of threat and people's willingness to act.
After the war started in February 2022, this month after that, our membership increased about 4,000 people. This was not the first time increasing of our membership. First time it was 2008, after Russia attacked Georgia. Then our people saw what's happening around, because it's not that far from here.
As the country's interior minister notes back in Tallinn, the country strives to be 2 steps ahead at all times.
In the next 2 years, we are going to put in place all the surveillance technology, all the cameras, sensors, and so on. But now we have additional challenges because of the drone threat. So if up to this time we planned to invest about 170, 180 millions. And it's always the internal security where the threat develops at first. So that's why we have to see this defense as a broad, not a narrow, where we are dealing only with military, but as a broad defense.
To that end, Estonia, which is amongst NATO's leaders in terms of defense spending as a percentage of GDP, has embarked on a mission to modernize its armaments.
We have bought possibilities for deep strike. So those capabilities are really crucial because we have seen from Ukraine that to liberate the territory is damn difficult. So don't give them an inch.
But while it appears that the entire nation is acutely aware of the looming danger, local experts downplay the likelihood of a Russian invasion using the so-called Narva scenario, in which Moscow attempts to grab an Estonian border city using its familiar old tune of defending the local Russian-speaking population.
It is not 2014, it's 2025, and actually a lot of things have changed. If we are speaking about little green men scenarios, this is not very realistic because our security services have a very clear overview of what is going on beyond our borders.
As you walk around the streets of Estonia, with its abundant reminders of the country's colonial history, you can't help but sense that this vigilant population is determined never to let history repeat itself, no matter how proximate the threat may seem. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
First of all, amazing report, very comprehensive. I think it wrapped everything up in a very kind of neat type of way. So very interesting stuff. And one thing that I immediately noticed how people are describing that they do not really necessarily feel more afraid, but more aware. And I feel like this is something that perhaps people who are not, they're not really experiencing that tension, find it hard to grasp. So can you help us understand what kind of mood that describes, and how would you describe the public mood overall?
I mean, so I would say that the feeling of fear in a situation like that is kind of a, in a way you just kind of accept the inevitable. Whereas I think the resilience which is cultivated in Estonia, so this kind of awareness that you have to be prepared for the worst case scenario, and this is kind of ingrained into the population from the very early stages, so from school period as well into children. It helps them to understand that they have a certain function that they would have to fulfill in a potential situation of crisis, and so they immediately assume a certain level of responsibility as well. So knowing that they have a responsibility to fulfill, knowing that they have a function in a situation of crisis, and that is what they have to be ready for, I would imagine, kind of pushes a supposed feeling of fear, dwindles it down, because the feeling of responsibility for the country takes over.
Man, that's impressive. Now, your report also shows, like mentioned, the integration of civilian into defense as well through the Defense League. Now, how central is that to Estonia's overall security approach, integrating civilians into part of defense?
I mean, it's fundamental because, as we've seen as well in Ukraine, the lack of general awareness, but also the lack of preparedness amongst civilian populations often makes the situation a lot more precarious, and the civilian population particularly a lot more vulnerable in a situation of a crisis. So by having a role in society, or by having an entire defense league dedicated to the fact that they would also have to support the activities of the military in a situation of crisis, it makes the military more resilient as well, as we've seen other countries across Europe. For example, Norway recently, when they were also participating, when the civilians were also participating very actively in military drills. It's about this cohabitation and this cooperation between the military and civilian sectors to ensure that they can both support each other, but also be better prepared to defend their country together.
Right. Do you have the sense that this whole society sort of approach towards defense will have actually act as a credible deterrence?
To an extent, definitely. I mean, when you know that your opponent is much more prepared, both on a civilian and military level, it can definitely serve as a level of deterrent. But at the same time, we have to remember that when we talk about Estonia, we do talk about a very, very small country that is, very vulnerable because of its geography and because of its size. And so as much as it can be a deterrent to a certain extent, I think in Estonia there are other factors as well which could potentially, you know, kind of weigh down or weigh up whichever way a potential confrontation with an adversary would go.
Right, but I think this is also one of those situations to have it so you don't have to use it type of approach to it as well. At the same time, your reporter also suggests some experts are downplaying possibility of a direct invasion. Do you think it's going to be difficult to reconcile that with this level of readiness?
I don't think that's necessarily, you know, it's difficult to reconcile with one another. I think the reason as to why the threat is being, as you mentioned, or as you stated, downplayed, is not so much because they don't want it to happen or they don't perceive that it's a viable threat. It's more so the fact that the geopolitical situation has changed very much so. Also, crucially, Estonia is a NATO member state, and so if Russia was to invade Estonia, it should at least in principle expect a reaction from fellow NATO member states. Additionally, I think the entire NATO alliance as such is much more acutely aware of the tactics and experiences that Russia has from battlefields. But at the same time, as they have also stated, it's not 2014. There's a lot less acceptance for allowing Russia to kind of take an inch and risking they will take a whole hand, you know.
Yeah, very much so. You also mentioned in your report newer challenges such as the emergence of drones. How much is that changing the way Estonia approaches security?
I think it's the same for you know, NATO members across the board. It's one of the components of modern battlefields, but it's not the only component. So the Estonian defense forces have to get trained up to be able to use those capabilities. They have to modernize their armies appropriately, but they still have to be aware of the fundamentals of how wars are being waged, and that's oftentimes trench warfare as well, as we see in Ukraine. And that is still the fundamental of how their training gets carried out, but at the same time, these new components, and this is going to be artificial intelligence in a couple of years as well, when it fully takes effect, they are also going to be implemented as part of the preparing for you know, modern warfare experiences.
Right, so as technology advances, of course, they have to adapt to it as well. Now, last but not least, what stayed with you the most after reporting there?
Sorry?
What stayed with you the most after your reporting there?
Stayed with me the most? Yeah. That's a very good question. I would say the fundamental experience, and that is the fundamental sentiment, which is something that I already mentioned at the beginning, and that is, despite the fact that Estonia is very vulnerable because of its geography, because of its size, and because of its history to a certain extent, because of the ethnic makeup, the you know, the expansion of, or the extent to which Russian is a first primary language used by a lot of the population residing within the country, there is a sense that they are acutely aware of the threat, and yet they are doing everything they can to be as prepared as they can for when the war comes, not if it comes. So there is a level of understanding and a level of acceptance that they will continue to be vulnerable, but they don't treat it as a way of kind of giving up and just kind of resigning to a fate that has been designated for them. Rather, they are doing everything they can to ensure that it doesn't actually happen.
Right, it's actually very inspiring. Thank you so much for bringing us this piece as well. You know, it takes a lot of work and really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us on News in Depth.
Thanks for having me on.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of News in Depth. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.